At my cousin's wedding, my family called me pathetic and said I never figured life out while I secretly led CIA Black Ops missions preventing terrorist attacks. When Deputy Director Morrison whispered "Ma'am, Black Ops leader" across the reception hall, my family realized their failure was actually one of the most decorated covert operatives in U.S. intelligence history. My name is Sophia Reeves, and for most of my adult life, I was the family member everyone whispered about with pity. Not because I was actually failing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But because my real career was so classified that I had to let them believe I was a complete disappointment. While my siblings collected prestigious degrees and built impressive public careers, I collected secrets that could destabilize governments and skills that could eliminate threats to national security. We were raised in the wealthy suburbs of McLean, Virginia, just miles from CIA headquarters, though my family had no idea how prophetic that proximity would become. My father, Dr. James Reeves, was a renowned neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins. My mother, Margaret Reeves, was a federal appellate judge. My older brother, David, was a partner at a top-tier law firm. And my younger sister, Emma, was a rising star in international finance. I was the one who couldn't find her direction. After graduating from Georgetown with a degree in international relations, I bounced between what my family saw as dead-end jobs, a brief stint at a think tank, some consulting work for government contractors, temporary positions at various security firms. To them, it looked like career chaos. In reality, it was the most sophisticated intelligence recruitment process in the world. Every job change was actually a step deeper into the intelligence community. The think tank was a CIA front. The consulting work was cover for operations training. The security firms were testing my psychological profile, my ability to compartmentalize information, and my capacity for living multiple identities simultaneously. What my family interpreted as instability was actually the agency building my legend and testing my operational readiness. The hardest part wasn't the danger or the isolation of covert work. It was watching my family's growing disappointment. At holiday dinners, while David discussed his latest corporate mergers and Emma shared stories about international banking deals, I had to deflect questions about my career struggles with vague references to contract work and exploring opportunities. My mother's concern was the most painful. She would pull me aside at family gatherings and ask if I needed financial help, if I was struggling with depression, if I had considered therapy to work through whatever was preventing me from living up to my potential. She genuinely believed her daughter was lost and directionless, never knowing that I was actually living up to potential she couldn't even imagine. The family narrative became fixed. Sophia was the smart one who somehow couldn't get her life together. While her siblings were building impressive careers and stable lives, she was drifting from job to job, unable to commit to anything meaningful. Extended family members spoke about me with the kind of sympathetic concern usually reserved for someone recovering from addiction or mental illness. What they didn't know was that by age 25, I was running intelligence operations across 3 continents. By 27, I was leading a specialized team that had disrupted dozens of terrorist financing networks. By 29, I commanded a Black Ops unit so classified that most CIA directors weren't cleared to know about our existence. But in my family's eyes, I was still the daughter who couldn't hold down a real job, who lived in a modest apartment instead of buying property, who dated sporadically because I was too focused on finding herself to maintain relationships. They saw instability where there was actually ironclad operational security. They saw failure where there was actually success beyond their comprehension. The contrast between my public identity and my classified reality was about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. At a family wedding where everyone would finally understand what their pathetic daughter had actually become. But before that revelation, I had to survive years of living a double life so complete that even I sometimes forgot which version of myself was real. Living a double life meant perfecting the art of being underestimated. While my family built their impressive public careers, I built an identity so unremarkable that no one would ever suspect I was capable of the things I actually did for a living. My cover story had to be believable, boring, and just unsuccessful enough to explain why I couldn't afford the lifestyle my siblings enjoyed. Every family gathering became a performance where I played the role of the struggling daughter. When David talked about his latest seven-figure legal victory, I would mention picking up freelance consulting work to pay rent. When Emma discussed her promotion to vice president at her investment firm, I would share updates about exploring different opportunities in the private security sector. My parents' McLean mansion became a stage where I performed mediocrity twice a month. Sunday dinners were exercises in creative fiction, where I had to explain my modest apartment, my lack of savings, and my inability to maintain long-term relationships. I told them I was working for small security consulting firms, doing background checks and risk assessments for corporate clients. Boring enough to discourage follow-up questions, but legitimate enough to explain irregular hours and occasional travel. The hardest part was watching their genuine concern grow into interventions. My mother started leaving career counseling brochures in my childhood bedroom. My father offered to pay for me to get an MBA, convinced that additional education would finally help me find my path. They meant well, but every gesture of help felt like a reminder of how completely I had to deceive the people who loved me most. The family Christmas parties were particularly brutal. Extended relatives would corner me with well-meaning questions about my future plans, while I stood there knowing I commanded a budget larger than most Fortune 500 companies and carried security clearance that less than 1,000 people in the country possessed. Cousins would offer to introduce me to their friends who worked in, quote, stable government jobs, unaware that I already worked for the most exclusive government agency in existence. My social media presence was carefully crafted to support my cover. While my siblings posted photos from exotic vacations and professional achievements, I shared pictures from modest weekend trips and generic inspirational quotes about finding your passion. My LinkedIn profile listed a series of short-term consulting positions with companies that existed primarily as CIA fronts, creating a paper trail of career instability that perfectly supported my family's narrative about my directionless life. Dating was impossible under these circumstances. How do you explain to someone that you can't talk about your work, can't maintain regular contact during certain periods, and sometimes disappear for weeks without explanation? My family attributed my single status to my inability to commit, or fear of settling down, never understanding that maintaining a romantic relationship while running covert operations was operationally impossible. The psychological toll was immense. I was living one of the most successful careers imaginable, while pretending to be a failure. I was protecting national security while my family worried about my personal security. I was making decisions that affected global politics while they questioned my ability to make decisions about my own life. But the cover was essential. My family's high-profile careers made them visible in Washington's social circles, which meant our dinner conversations could theoretically be monitored by foreign intelligence services. Their genuine belief in my mediocrity was actually my greatest operational asset. No one investigates the disappointing daughter of prominent Washington figures. Every family photo, every holiday gathering, every concerned phone call from my mother was part of an elaborate security protocol designed to protect not just me, but the operations I was running and the lives of the people who worked under my command. My family's disappointment in me was literally a matter of national security. The first sign that my carefully constructed double life was becoming unsustainable came during what should have been a routine family dinner. I had just returned from a 3-week consulting assignment that was actually a Black Ops mission in Eastern Europe, where my team had successfully extracted a high-value intelligence asset from hostile territory. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and 4 hours of sleep in the past 72 hours. My mother noticed immediately. "Sophia, you look terrible," she said, studying my face with the clinical precision of someone who had spent decades making life-or-death medical decisions. "Are you eating properly? You've lost weight, and there are circles under your eyes that weren't there last month." I deflected with my usual cover story about working long hours on a challenging project, but she wasn't satisfied. "What kind of consulting work requires you to disappear for weeks at a time, and why won't you ever tell us specifics about these clients?" The questions were getting more pointed, more suspicious. My family's concern was evolving from general worry about my career prospects into active investigation of what I was actually doing with my life. David, with his lawyer's instincts for detecting inconsistencies, started asking follow-up questions about my work that I struggled to answer convincingly. "You mentioned doing risk assessment for corporate clients," he said over dessert, "but every time we ask for details, You cite confidentiality agreements. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What kind of small consulting firm has clients with security clearance requirements? I felt the walls of my cover story beginning to crack under scrutiny from people who knew me too well to accept vague explanations indefinitely. My family was intelligent, successful, and increasingly suspicious that something didn't add up about my professional life. The breaking point came when Emma offered to help me network within her finance industry connections. I know people at several consulting firms that work with government contractors, she said. I could make some introductions, help you find something more stable than this freelance work. I panicked and made a mistake that nearly destroyed my operational security. I told her I was already in discussions with several firms and might be getting an offer soon. It was a lie designed to buy time, but it created expectations I couldn't meet without compromising my real work. 2 weeks later, Emma cornered me at a family birthday party with news that shattered my carefully maintained fiction. I called around to some of my contacts about those government consulting positions, she said, her expression troubled. Nobody has heard of the firms you claim to work for. Sophia, what's really going on? I stared at her, realizing that my sister had just conducted her own intelligence investigation into my cover story and found it lacking. The fictional consulting companies that worked perfectly for casual conversation couldn't withstand scrutiny from someone with actual connections in the government contracting world. Some of the company names you've mentioned don't exist, she continued. Others exist but have no record of hiring recent graduates or working on the kinds of projects you've described. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you lying to us about what you're really doing? That night, I called my handler for the first time in 3 years to discuss a personal security issue. Agent Martinez listened to my explanation of the family's growing suspicion and was quiet for a long time. This was inevitable, he said finally. Your family is too smart and too well connected to maintain this level of operational fiction indefinitely. We need to discuss your options, because your current cover identity is compromised. The conversation that followed would change everything about how I could live my life, and whether I could continue both my family relationships and my intelligence career simultaneously. The meeting with Agent Martinez changed everything about how I could live my life. We met at a nondescript coffee shop in Arlington, the kind of place where intelligence professionals conduct conversations that can't happen in official buildings. What he told me that afternoon would force me to make the most difficult choice of my career. Your family's investigation into your cover story has created a security risk we can't ignore, he said, stirring his coffee with the mechanical precision of someone who had delivered bad news many times before. Emma's inquiries have attracted attention from people who monitor government contractor databases. Your operational security is compromised. I felt my carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. What are my options? 3 choices, he said, pulling out a manila envelope that contained documents I wasn't sure I wanted to see. First, we can relocate you with a new identity, complete separation from your family, new background, new life. Second, we can transfer you to a desk position where your family connections won't pose a security risk. Or third. He paused, and I could see in his expression that the third option was the one he was reluctant to discuss. Third, we can bring your family into the fold. Limited disclosure, signed confidentiality agreements, enough truth to satisfy their questions without compromising ongoing operations. It's never been done at your operational level, but your family's security clearances and professional positions make them theoretically eligible. The idea was both terrifying and appealing. After years of lying to the people I loved most, the possibility of finally sharing some version of the truth felt like oxygen to someone who had been drowning. But it also meant exposing them to risks I had spent my entire career trying to protect them from. That night, I sat in my modest apartment, the same apartment my family pitied me for living in, which was actually a carefully chosen safe house with security features they couldn't see, and tried to imagine explaining to my parents that their disappointing daughter was actually running some of the most sensitive intelligence operations in U.S. history. The decision was made for me 2 days later when my father scheduled what he called an intervention. He had coordinated with David and Emma to confront me about what they believed were serious problems in my life that required immediate attention. They thought they were saving me from myself. In reality, they were about to force my hand in ways that would endanger everything I had worked to build. The intervention took place in my father's study, surrounded by his medical degrees and professional awards. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to be lectured about career achievement by people who had no idea what I had actually achieved. "Sophia," my father began, his voice carrying the weight of years of accumulated concern, "we love you too much to watch you waste your life. Emma has discovered that some of the companies you claim to work for don't exist. David has friends in government contracting who have never heard of the projects you describe. We're worried you're either lying to us about serious problems or you're involved in something dangerous that you can't tell us about." The accuracy of his second guess was startling. My father had just articulated exactly what was happening in my life, but he said it like it was the worst-case scenario instead of the reality. "We've made some calls," David added, pulling out his own folder of documents. "We've arranged for you to meet with several legitimate consulting firms, and we've researched some government positions that might be appropriate for your background. This fantasy career has to end." I looked around the room at 3 people who loved me enough to stage this intervention, not knowing they were inadvertently threatening national security operations that protected millions of Americans. The choice was no longer mine to make. I left my father's study that evening, knowing I had exactly 72 hours to make a decision that would change everything. My family's intervention had crossed a line from concerned questioning into active investigation that threatened operational security. I couldn't continue living this double life, but I also couldn't abandon either my family or my mission. That night, I made a call that violated every protocol I had ever learned. I contacted Deputy Director Morrison directly, bypassing the entire chain of command to request an emergency meeting about a personal security matter that was becoming a national security issue. "Agent Reeves," her voice was crisp and professional even at 11 p.m., "explained to me why this couldn't wait for normal channels." I took a deep breath and told her everything. The family intervention, Emma's investigation into my cover companies, David's legal contacts asking questions, my father's ultimatum that I accept help finding a real job or face complete family estrangement. I explained that my operational security was compromised not by foreign intelligence services, but by people who loved me too much to watch me fail. The silence that followed lasted so long I wondered if the line had gone dead. When Morrison finally spoke, her words changed the trajectory of my entire career. "Agent Reeves, what I'm about to tell you is unprecedented in agency history. Your family's security clearances, professional positions, and demonstrated ability to maintain confidentiality make them eligible for limited disclosure under Emergency Protocol 7. This has never been used for personal family situations, but the threat to your operational security makes this a legitimate national security concern. Emergency Protocol 7. I had heard rumors of its existence but never seen it implemented. It allowed for selective disclosure of classified information to civilians under extraordinary circumstances, with full legal agreements and lifelong monitoring. However, Morrison continued, this decision cannot be made unilaterally. It requires approval from the Director, the Deputy Director of Operations, and the Office of General Counsel. More importantly, it requires your family to undergo the same security clearance process as agency personnel, including polygraph examinations and background investigations. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal documents, security protocols, and conversations that would have been impossible to imagine a week earlier. Morrison's team moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to handling sensitive situations quickly and quietly. My family, still believing they were staging an intervention for their troubled daughter, received a phone call that changed their entire understanding of who I was. A man identifying himself as Deputy Director Morrison requested a meeting to discuss matters of national security relating to your daughter's employment. I watched my father's expression change from confusion to shock to something approaching awe as he realized that his failure daughter's mysterious work life was about to be explained by someone whose authority he couldn't question or dismiss. The meeting was scheduled for the following day at a secure facility in Langley. My family would learn that their disappointing daughter was actually one of the most successful covert operatives in CIA history, but they would also learn that her success came with responsibilities and risks they had never imagined. The night before the meeting, I sat in my safe house apartment, looking through photo albums filled with family memories, holidays, graduations, birthdays, where I had smiled and pretended to be someone I wasn't. Tomorrow, they would finally meet the real me. But I realized that even I wasn't sure who the real me was anymore. After years of living this double life, the line between Sophia the family disappointment and Agent Reeves the Black Ops leader had become so blurred that I wondered if I could successfully integrate these two identities, or if revealing the truth would destroy both versions of myself. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, was about to be tested in ways no operational training had prepared me for. The secure briefing room at CIA headquarters had hosted foreign ministers, defense secretaries, and heads of state, but it had never hosted a family intervention disguised as a national security briefing. When my parents, David and Emma, walked through those doors, they entered a world I had never been able to share with them, and a conversation that would either restore our relationship or destroy it forever. Deputy Director Morrison sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by the agency's general counsel and the Deputy Director of Operations. The walls were lined with maps and screens that had been carefully sanitized of any classified information, but the room's authority was unmistakable. This wasn't a corporate boardroom or a judicial chamber. This was where decisions were made that affected global security. Dr. and Mrs. Reeves, Mr. Reeves, Ms. Reeves, Morrison began, using their formal titles to establish the gravity of the situation. Thank you for coming. What we're about to discuss requires absolute confidentiality and will fundamentally change your understanding of your daughter's professional life. I watched my family's expressions shift from confusion to concern to something approaching fear. They had come here expecting to discuss my career problems, not to be briefed by senior intelligence officials about matters of national security. Your daughter, Agent Sophia Reeves, is one of our most valuable operative assets, Morrison continued. For the past 7 years, she has been conducting classified intelligence operations at the highest levels of national security priority. Her work has prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil and disrupted international criminal organizations that posed direct threats to U.S. interests. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went through a spectrum of emotions: disbelief, recognition, and then something I had never seen before. Genuine awe mixed with horror at the implications of what he was learning. The consulting work you've been questioning, Morrison explained, was cover for operations that required her to travel to hostile territories, extract high-value intelligence assets, and coordinate multi-agency responses to imminent threats. The companies you couldn't verify exist as classified agency fronts designed to provide operational security for personnel, like your daughter. David, with his lawyer's instincts for detail, was the first to speak. You're saying Sophia has been working for the CIA this entire time? That everything she's told us about her career has been a lie? Not a lie, Morrison corrected. Operational security. Agent Reeves has been protecting not only her own safety, but the safety of her operations, her team members, and frankly, your family. Your high-profile careers in Washington make you potential targets for foreign intelligence services seeking to compromise agency personnel. My mother, who had spent years worrying about my mental health and career prospects, looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. Sophia, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this true? This was the moment I had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. After years of disappointing the people I loved most, I was finally able to tell them the truth. But that truth came with implications they weren't prepared to handle. Yes, I said simply. I lead a classified unit that conducts black operations. The work you've been worried about me not finding? I've been doing it for 7 years. The success you thought I was incapable of achieving? I've been achieving it at levels you couldn't imagine. The weight of 7 years of deception hung in the room like smoke. My family was processing the fact that their disappointing daughter was actually one of the most successful intelligence operatives in the country, while simultaneously realizing that everything they thought they knew about me had been carefully constructed fiction. What happens now? Emma asked, her financial analyst mind immediately jumping to the practical implications of this revelation. Morrison's answer would determine whether I could have both a family and a career, or whether this revelation would destroy both. What happened next tested every assumption I'd made about my family's capacity to handle the truth. Morrison's revelation should have ended with relief, understanding, and reconciliation. Instead, it triggered the most painful confrontation of my life, as my family struggled to process not just what I did for a living, but the implications of 7 years of elaborate deception. The immediate aftermath of the briefing was silence so complete I could hear the air conditioning system cycling. Then my father stood up, his face flushed with an emotion I couldn't identify: anger, betrayal, or something more complex. "You let us think you were failing," he said, his voice shaking. "For 7 years we worried about you, tried to help you, felt sorry for you. You sat at our dinner table and let us treat you like a child who couldn't get her life together while you were running secret missions?" My mother's reaction was worse. "I offered to pay for therapy, Sophia. I thought you were depressed, struggling, possibly having some kind of breakdown. Do you have any idea what that did to me as your mother? Watching what I thought was my daughter falling apart?" The hurt in her voice was devastating. I had anticipated that revealing my true career would bring relief and pride. Instead, it had unleashed years of accumulated parental anguish that I had unknowingly caused. David's legal mind immediately jumped to the practical implications. How much of your life has been a lie? The apartment, the relationships, the financial struggles, was any of that real? "The emotions were real," I said, trying to explain something that had no precedent in normal family relationships. "The love, the relationships, the time we spent together. That was all genuine. Only the professional details were fabricated." "Only the professional details?" Emma's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had discovered a fundamental betrayal. "You let Dad offer to pay for graduate school when you probably make more money than all of us combined. You let me try to network for you in finance when you have security clearance higher than most cabinet members. You made us feel sorry for you." The conversation spiraled into territory I hadn't prepared for. Instead of pride in my achievements, they felt manipulated by my secrecy. Instead of understanding the necessity of my cover story, they focused on the emotional damage of believing their daughter was struggling when she was actually succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. Morrison, who had remained silent during this family confrontation, finally intervened. "I understand this is difficult, but I need to explain the security implications going forward. Your knowledge of Agent Reeves's true role now makes you potential intelligence targets. You'll need to undergo security clearance processes, sign confidentiality agreements, and submit to ongoing monitoring." This revelation made everything worse. Not only had I deceived them for 7 years, but my deception now required them to alter their own lives to accommodate my security needs. They were being forced into my secret world whether they wanted to be there or not. My father's next words cut deeper than any physical wound I'd sustained in the field. "We need time to process this," he said, not looking at me. "I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't know if I can trust anything you've told us about anything else in your life." The meeting ended with my family walking out of CIA headquarters more estranged from me than they had ever been, despite finally knowing the truth about my career. My attempt to save both my family relationships and my professional life had potentially destroyed both. That night, Morrison called me with news that made everything exponentially worse. "Agent Reeves, I'm afraid there's been a development. Your family's emotional reaction to the disclosure has created security concerns. The psychological evaluation team is recommending restrictions on your operational status until we can assess whether this personal situation compromises your ability to maintain compartmentalization. 7 years of perfect operational security, destroyed by the people who loved me most." What happened next tested every assumption I'd made about my family's capacity to handle the truth. Morrison's revelation should have ended with relief, understanding, and reconciliation. Instead, it triggered the most painful confrontation of my life, as my family struggled to process not just what I did for a living, but the implications of 7 years of elaborate deception. The immediate aftermath of the briefing was silence so complete I could hear the air conditioning system cycling. Then my father stood up, his face flushed with an emotion I couldn't identify: anger, betrayal, or something more complex. "You let us think you were failing," he said, his voice shaking. "For 7 years we worried about you, tried to help you, felt sorry for you. You sat at our dinner table and let us treat you like a child who couldn't get her life together while you were running secret missions? My mother's reaction was worse. I offered to pay for therapy, Sophia. I thought you were depressed, struggling, possibly having some kind of breakdown. Do you have any idea what that did to me as your mother? Watching what I thought was my daughter falling apart. The hurt in her voice was devastating. I had anticipated that revealing my true career would bring relief and pride. Instead, it had unleashed years of accumulated parental anguish that I had unknowingly caused. David's legal mind immediately jumped to the practical implications. How much of your life has been a lie? The apartment, the relationships, the financial struggles, was any of that real? The emotions were real, I said, trying to explain something that had no precedent in normal family relationships. The love, the relationships, the time we spent together. That was all genuine. Only the professional details were fabricated. Only the professional details. Emma's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had discovered a fundamental betrayal. You let Dad offer to pay for graduate school when you probably make more money than all of us combined. You let me try to network for you in finance when you have security clearance higher than most cabinet members. You made us feel sorry for you. The conversation spiraled into territory I hadn't prepared for. Instead of pride in my achievements, they felt manipulated by my secrecy. Instead of understanding the necessity of my cover story, they focused on the emotional damage of believing their daughter was struggling when she was actually succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. Morrison, who had remained silent during this family confrontation, finally intervened. I understand this is difficult, but I need to explain the security implications going forward. Your knowledge of Agent Reeves's true role now makes you potential intelligence targets. You'll need to undergo security clearance processes, sign confidentiality agreements, and submit to ongoing monitoring. This revelation made everything worse. Not only had I deceived them for 7 years, but my deception now required them to alter their own lives to accommodate my security needs. They were being forced into my secret world whether they wanted to be there or not. My father's next words cut deeper than any physical wound I'd sustained in the field. We need time to process this, he said, not looking at me. I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't know if I can trust anything you've told us about anything else in your life. The meeting ended with my family walking out of CIA headquarters more estranged from me than they had ever been, despite finally knowing the truth about my career. My attempt to save both my family relationships and my professional life had potentially destroyed both. That night, Morrison called me with news that made everything exponentially worse. Agent Reeves, I'm afraid there's been a development. Your family's emotional reaction to the disclosure has created security concerns. The psychological evaluation team is recommending restrictions on your operational status until we can assess whether this personal situation compromises your ability to maintain compartmentalization. 7 years of perfect operational security, destroyed by the people who loved me most. I decided to attend Rachel's wedding, knowing it might be the last time I would see my family as a member of it, rather than as a stranger they happened to share DNA with. The decision wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. I needed to see them one final time before accepting that my career had cost me the only relationships that had ever mattered to me personally. The wedding was held at the Hay Adams Hotel, overlooking the White House, where I had briefed presidents but could never tell my family about it. I arrived wearing the same department store dress I had worn to family events for years, the one that had helped maintain my cover as the struggling daughter. The irony felt appropriate. This would be my last performance as the disappointing family member. My family's reaction to seeing me was exactly what I had expected. Polite acknowledgement, careful distance, and conversations that avoided any topic that might remind them of the fundamental deception that had defined our relationship for 7 years. I was a stranger wearing a familiar face, someone they recognized but no longer trusted or understood. I spent the cocktail hour standing alone near the bar, watching my siblings network with DC's political elite while avoiding any meaningful interaction with me. Extended family members who didn't know about the CIA disclosure continued to offer sympathetic encouragement about my career prospects, unaware that they were talking to someone who had been suspended from one of the most sensitive positions in the intelligence community. But then something unexpected happened. During the reception dinner, while my uncle was giving a toast about family loyalty and unconditional love, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. A man in a dark suit was speaking quietly with hotel security, flashing credentials that I recognized even from across the room. Federal agents were arriving at my cousin's wedding, and they were looking for me. My operational instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't social. This was business. Something had happened that required my immediate attention. Something significant enough to interrupt my suspension and locate me at a family event. I excused myself from the table and approached the lead agent, who I recognized as Deputy Director Morrison's personal security detail. "Agent Reeves," he said quietly. "Deputy Director Morrison needs to speak with you immediately. We have a situation that requires your specific expertise and operational knowledge." The conversation that followed took place in a secure hotel conference room that had been hastily converted into a classified briefing space. Morrison, who had flown in from Langley, looked exhausted in a way that suggested this crisis had been developing for hours. "Agent Reeves," she began, "we have a developing terrorist situation in downtown D.C. 3 separate intelligence sources indicate coordinated attacks planned for tonight targeting federal buildings. The problem is that these attacks are being planned using operational methods you developed during your work with international terrorist networks." I stared at her, processing the implications. Someone is using my intelligence to plan attacks against American targets? "Not your intelligence," she clarified. "Your methods. The operational frameworks you developed for disrupting terrorist financing and communications have been reverse-engineered by the same networks you've been tracking. We need someone who understands both the terrorist methodology and your counterterrorism innovations to coordinate our response." What she was telling me was that my own work, the classified operations I had spent 7 years perfecting, had been compromised and was now being used against the country I had served. My suspension was being lifted not because my personal situation had been resolved, but because the crisis was too severe to handle without my expertise. "Agent Reeves," Morrison continued, "we need you to coordinate a multi-agency response team tonight. This requires someone with your operational background and your understanding of the specific terrorist networks involved. Are you prepared to return to active duty?" I looked through the conference room window at the wedding reception where my family was celebrating without me, then back at Morrison, who was asking me to once again choose my country over my personal relationships. But this time, the choice felt different. This wasn't about maintaining a cover story or protecting operational security. This was about using everything I had learned, everything I had sacrificed, to prevent attacks that could kill hundreds of Americans. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The operation that night lasted 14 hours and prevented what would have been the most devastating terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. Using intelligence networks I had spent years building and counterterrorism methods I had developed through classified operations, we disrupted coordinated attacks on the Pentagon, the Capitol building, and the FBI headquarters. By dawn, we had captured 12 operatives and prevented attacks that could have killed thousands. But the real transformation came when I returned to the hotel at 6 a.m., still wearing my evening dress under tactical gear, to find my family waiting in the lobby. They had spent the entire night watching news reports about a developing security situation in D.C., without knowing their disappointing daughter was the one coordinating the federal response. My father was the first to speak. "We saw Deputy Director Morrison on the news," he said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. "She mentioned the operation was led by one of their most experienced Black Ops commanders. When you didn't come back to the reception, we started to understand." What followed was the conversation I had imagined, but never believed would actually happen. For the first time in 7 years, I was able to tell my family not just what I did for work, but why it mattered. I explained that the methods used in that night's attack were based on intelligence frameworks I had developed, that the terrorist networks we disrupted were ones I had been tracking for years, that my consulting work had actually been preventing attacks they never knew were being planned. "The apartment you thought was too modest," I said, looking directly at my mother. "It's a safe house designed to protect operational security. The relationships that didn't work out, they failed. Because dating someone in my position requires security clearances and lifestyle restrictions that most people can't handle. The financial struggles you worried about? I've been maintaining a cover identity that required appearing unsuccessful while actually earning a salary higher than everyone at this table combined. My mother's reaction was everything I had hoped for during 7 years of disappointing her. "You prevented attacks," she said, her voice filled with something I had never heard directed at me before: pride. "While we were worried about your career prospects, you were literally saving lives." David, with his lawyer's precision for detail, asked the question that mattered most. How many lives? I looked around at my family. These people who had spent years pitying me while I served at the highest levels of national security, and gave them the answer I had never been able to share. Conservative estimate? Over the past 7 years, operations I've led or contributed to have prevented attacks that would have killed approximately 15,000 Americans. The financing networks we've disrupted have cut funding to terrorist operations across 3 continents. The intelligence assets I've extracted have provided information that's shaped foreign policy decisions at the presidential level. The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence that had greeted Morrison's initial disclosure. This was reverence, recognition, and something approaching awe at the scope of what their pathetic daughter had actually accomplished. Emma was the first to understand the broader implications. "You've been protecting all of us," she said. "Not just the country, us, specifically. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time we worried about your safety, you were actually the one keeping us safe." 6 months later, I received the Intelligence Star, the CIA's highest decoration for extraordinary heroism. The ceremony was classified, but my family was there, cleared, briefed, and finally able to witness recognition for achievements they could never have imagined. Today, when young intelligence officers ask me about the personal costs of covert work, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the people who love you most will be the last to understand your worth, not because they don't care, but because the most important work often happens in shadows where love can't see. My family spent 7 years thinking I was their failure. I spent 7 years believing their disappointment was the price of my service. We were both wrong. Their disappointment was temporary, but the lives I saved, the attacks I prevented, and the security I helped maintain, that's permanent. Sometimes the greatest sacrifice isn't giving up the people you love, but letting them think you're not worth loving until you can prove that everything you sacrificed was worth it. The woman they called pathetic turned out to be the one protecting everything they held dear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.